Everybody, welcome back to Historians of the Movies podcast. I am your host and creator, Jason Herbert, and every single week we are bringing you movies and the histories behind them. And this week, we're talking about spy movies. And if you're anything like me, you like a good caper, and there's no shortage of them to pick from. And this week, we're choosing 1992's Sneakers, a cult classic, a favorite that seemingly everybody loves. And we've been wanting to line this film up for a long time. And it took us a little while, but we found just the right guy to have on the podcast. And I'm talking about Brian Michael Murphy. He's our guest this week. He's an associate professor of American Studies at Williams College and a faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. More specifically, Brian would call himself a media archaeologist, and he's got a great new book out through UNC Press called We the Dead: Preserving Data at the End of the World. I read it. It's so much fun, these kind of questions about what do we do with all this stuff we're digging up and storing. And we have the best conversation talking not only about our mutual love of sneakers, but also what's with the American fascination with data storage and accumulation. And what are we doing with all this stuff? And where does it go when we're gone? This is a really fun conversation. I hope you dig it. It's a blast. I'm going to say we're sponsored by C-Tech Astronomy and not some of the other terms that are found in the crosswords on this and Scrabble. But sit back and relax because Sneakers is next on Historians of the Movies podcast. Are you in Boston area? Where specifically are you?
Yeah, I'm in Williamstown, Massachusetts. I teach American Studies at Williams College, so Western Massachusetts.
Okay, all right. I have so many questions. You were saying thank you for the invite early on, and dude, I have to tell you, I hounded UNC Press for this book like so freaking much. I do a lot of UNC Press's books. Like I got friends with a lot of the people. Like they publish a lot like in the native South. So I grew up kind of like as a scholar reading their stuff, and I got to know them. And I was at the AHA in San Francisco like earlier this year, and they had your book like on display, and I could not like stop looking at this cover. Like I was like, can I have it? Let me bring it home. And they said no, and they never say no to me like ever. I mean, they sent a copy in the mail, right? But I was like, I need this now. I was so eager to like jump in and read your book, and I'm so excited to talk to you about this because it's, we were just talking about before we logged on. I had to like restart my computer. I was like, well, there's your data issue right now to start and so forth. So, dude, I am so excited for you to be here and also to talk about this movie.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
Well, okay, so we were, as people know, like I usually ask the guests, hey, what movie do you want to talk about? Because it's not so much important if people like a movie or whatever movie it is, so much as like you like talking about the movie. And we were talking about a couple different ideas, and you said Sneakers, and I was like, fuck yes, absolutely, let's go. So I sat down, and of all people, I'm talking to my ex-wife the other night. I'm like, yeah, I'm doing Sneakers. She's like, that's my favorite movie. I'm like, I know, Christine. I know. She's like, I was like, this is my podcast. It's not yours. So thank you for, letting me go down that nostalgia lane. Well, I'm keeping one of her children hostage here at my house over the summer. So, there's that. So, but before we get in, you want to maybe introduce yourself a little bit to our audience and crowd and so forth, and we'll kind of jump in.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm Brian Michael Murphy. The book that you were just talking about, We the Dead, it was my first book. Took me a long time to write it, but it was a lot of fun too. And it took me a lot of different places. So one of the things I tried to do in the book was not just write about the archival artifacts that I found to build my argument, but also try to tell the story of what it was like to go to those archives, because so much of what I was writing about was really about how we treat these artifacts, our relationships to data and all the forms that it can take, from paper to microfilm to digital and all that. So right now I teach in American Studies at Williams College, and my Ph.D. was actually interdisciplinary. So I've been a media studies professor before. I've been an interdisciplinary studies professor at other places. And so, yeah, I'm really enjoying being here. You were asking about Boston. I spend a little time in Cambridge because I have an appointment at a research center there at Harvard, the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. And I really love to write, and I've always loved movies. There was a time where if you asked me, around the time that Sneakers came out, if you asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I probably would have said something related to writing, and I may have even said like film director or something like that, because I was just so into movies. And I don't know how old you are, but I'm assuming
about to be 47.
Yeah. So you were around back then too, in the early 90s when, I remember going to the movies once a week at least for like several years. And granted, I probably wasn't as discerning as I am now, but 80-90% of those movies were at least very enjoyable, and many of them were incredible. And I still revisit them. Part of it's nostalgia, but part of it was the craft. Part of it was true artists also deeply desiring to please their audience and seeing that as a part of the art, which is sort of where I find myself now as an artist, as a scholar. It's like I've written scholarly work. I've written sort of obscure, avant-garde experimental poems. I've done all that kind of fun stuff. And now I'm like, I want to take on the challenge of telling a story. It's like writing a pop song, right? People hear pop music and like, oh, that's easy. Anybody could do that. Well, when you sit down to write a good pop song, it is not easy to do. Walking the tightrope of cliche and making people feel something. So that's sort of where I'm at. And that's sort of what it is a UNC Press book. It is a scholarly book. It has a lot of archival research informing it, but I wanted to infuse as much as possible the sense that stories were being told, and the sense that there was a person, at the heart of it, discovering these things. And then everything that I wrote about, all the data I was writing about, also was connected to real people. So that was the goal.
Okay. So first of all, I spent the last 3 days combing through your book, like just tearing into it. I got real excited. I started reading it, and we're going into. I'm going to ask you more about Iron Mountain in a bit, but it was such a fun intro into the book, and you're talking about your own interdisciplinarity, and it was it's obvious that you say that now, because it's you're coming at this book with all these really cool different angles. As I'm reading through this. And you talk about your love of film and stuff like that. Dude, in my early 20s, once I got my personal freedom, I'm going 2-3 times a week, right? Yeah. And the HATM thing that I do now, this whole thing, kind of came just as a byproduct of growing up. But the more I've thought about my own path to becoming a historian and stuff like that, was infused by a love of when you watch Star Wars and Indiana Jones and all this stuff, it's all storytelling, right? And they're all really telling histories, right? Star Wars starts off a long time ago, a galaxy far, far away, right? It's oh, this is a history of a conflict, So I get you, right? Right there. It's so much work. And writing, you talk about the love of writing, which comes through, by the way, in the book, so much, right? All we're doing is telling stories. So, and I feel we could have talked about a whole bunch of different movies. If maybe I'll get you back on here if you want, because absolutely. I want to talk about this movie, the Sneakers, because you said this and it's come up. A lot of people have asked about this to be on HATM. So many people when are you going to cover this? Is one of those films that it's not a huge film. But people, I don't know, maybe other historians dig it. I don't know if it's just people who are kind of, who dig this kind of stuff, nerdy. I don't know. There's a love for this movie, man. And sitting back down to watch it the other night, I hadn't seen this in probably a couple decades, but it's always been in my mind. So I guess the question I got for you is of all the films we could have talked about.
Yeah.
You picked this one. Why Sneakers?
Well, it's simultaneously beloved and it's sort of unsung. There are a lot of people who really, really love it, and there are a lot of people who've never even heard of it. And the cast, the first thing is the cast is just unbelievable.
Ridiculous.
And it's only become, the casting has only become more resonant over time. I'm not a cold person, but I generally am not one to sort of emote very much about the passing of celebrities, right? Because I don't know them, and they're just not really in my life in that way. But and I know people do often like take to Twitter and say, today we lost, and I get that, right? Like
Sure.
I understand that. It's just not how I usually respond to those things if I didn't know the person. But River Phoenix, I mean, the course of at least American film history, if he had lived, because he's all over Leonardo DiCaprio's corner, he's taken roles from Brad Pitt. I mean, everything, all these other movies that we could talk about on this podcast from the 90s that are probably important to both me and you, that whole landscape would have looked different if he had lived. So when I watch this, you watch this or you watch the opening minutes of Last Crusade, and it's just like crushing because he was so fantastic. And he's minor. He's the most minor of the ensemble, right? So
he's almost comic relief in this film.
Totally. He's a totally comical character. He's not a computer expert, and at least at the level the other guys, right? He hacked the school computer to change his grade, right?
Yeah.
So that's part of it. The ensemble cast. The other thing about this movie, and rather than, I mean, we'll talk about it thematically and all those things and go wherever you want to go. But one of the things that's, when I rewatched it, one of the things that really stuck with me was just how smart it is from a craft perspective. And I think that's the thing that sort of makes it resonate with people, because there are a lot of gadgets in this movie, right? Maybe some of the weaknesses of the movie are some of the easy fixes that the gadget allows them to do. But they don't do that every time. And they sort of balance that out with these surprising moments of storytelling. So, for instance, when they're trying to break into Janek's office to get the black box, there's this keypad. And Sidney Poitier, the ex-CIA guy, says, "Oh, those things are unbeatable," right? And then Dan Aykroyd, the conspiracy theorist, says, "Oh, I have this thing from a buddy of mine who was in Desert Storm." He was on the other side, of course. But and they flip to it. And they start telling Robert Redford over the phone how to do it. They don't let you hear what's being said. So you just get Robert Redford, And, Robert Redford's beautiful. So you can just look at him saying, over and over. And it's captivating. So he does this series of, yeah, got it. Okay, I'll try it. And then he just kicks it open, right? This has happened in other movies. It's in The Last Boy Scout. Bruce Willis does a similar thing. That was later. So there are moments like that where it's just like, you didn't have to make us laugh there. You didn't have to like introduce yet one more challenge and one more obstacle for them to get what they want. But they just took these moments and they tell you something about the character. They tell you something about how smart these guys are, and it communicates something about the care that went into making the film. And they get you to these moments like David Strathairn driving the van blind and them communicating, Robert Redford guiding him through. I mean, it's just brilliant stuff. It's on the level of that great Spielberg stuff, that great George Lucas stuff, where it's just, they're like, we know we need to get them in the van. What is the most interesting way, without being too over the top, or maybe being over the top? If it's good, it's good though. How can we get them from the rooftop into the van? And that's the name of the game. You ask the question, how can we make it better? You crank it, you distill it. And then, there's just things we've never seen before. I mean, I don't know can you recall a movie where they said, first of all, there's a thermal sensor that we've got to beat. And then we're going to beat the thermal sensor by raising the temperature of the room to 98.6 degrees. Combined with Robert Redford, to beat the motion sensor, he has to move at like no more than 2 inches per second. So there's this beautiful symmetry where you've got that scene juxtaposed with the opening scene where it's all rush. The alarm goes off. They got to get over the barricade before it all. So there are just things like that about it that are so beautiful. And then just one last thing, James Horner, the score. The first time I looked at the movies he had done, I'm like, oh, this guy scored my whole consciousness for my entire adolescence. Legends of the Fall, Glory. I mean, even like cult weird stuff. Like there was a sci-fi film, Crawl, with like
with the stars. I never figured out how he could how he could fight with that. It looked cool, but like, how do you hold the thing?
Yeah, the glaive. Yeah, it was one of those things where it's like, should my dad have showed me this movie at 5 years old? I don't know, but he did, and then it was formative, So when you look at like the way that he's able to make you feel about the characters and about the moment. I think that his score is actually a huge part of why this movie stays with us.
Okay. So I usually said, I think people know, like, I usually kind of give people like, this has never been like a gotcha podcast or anything like that. Right. Like, so I always kind of want, and folks come in and are like, hey, this is a general idea of stuff we're going to talk about. And I, kind of write some stuff, and the things you're hitting on are like my whole notes here that I'm taking. I'm like, Branford Mars, is this a 90s film? Right.
This movie, I hacked your notebook. Yeah.
Oh, see, it wouldn't surprise me. After watching this film, like now I'm just like looking around. I should probably announce that I do work for the federal government. So people that want to work check out the forests out here in Colorado. Yeah. I felt okay. You were talking about like that whole bit where Redford is like sneaking in, right? Where they got the temperature controlled room and all this stuff. And I'm like, did Mission Impossible lift from this movie? Were you not getting those vibes when you were watching that scene over again?
It may have. I mean, it's possible. It's a small universe, right? Before the Marvel universe, right? There was the American paranoid thriller universe, right? And it's, you've got Redford in this movie, and he's basically playing an older version, a kind of like older version of his 3 Days of the Condor character to some degree, right?
Absolutely.
And then you've got, it's not as tight as like Gene Hackman in Enemy of the State a few years later, reaching back to the conversation. But, maybe that's also something that was, sort of a sneakers type move, right? To bring that character back. And then you've got on the production side, right? You've got, probably my favorite movie of all time, The Firm, which, is directed by Sidney Poitier, who directed
The Firm, right here, dude.
Who directed 3 Days of the Condor, right? So, and then you've got there's just so many like interlinkages, and everybody who makes those movies, of course, knows those movies, but they don't just know them. They're working on a psychological sector of the American populace that I think to do it right takes a really, really deep understanding of things. And, so you got movies like The Parallax View with Beatty, which is also in this vein. And that's a beautiful movie. It's shot it's just gorgeously shot. I don't remember, it was Gordon Willis or Haskell Wexler or one of those, like one of the great Conrad Halls, one of those greats. I can't remember who. But it's not a fun movie. It's not fun. It's beautiful, but Sneakers somehow manages to get in there, and you have so much fun watching it, even though what you're watching is like terrifying. It's not easy to do.
Well, I think that's a brilliance of this film, right? It's like, I was trying to think of, obviously Redford's our protagonist here, right? Yeah. This film is everybody in this movie is so likable. Yeah. And like you're saying, there's these great moments of levity. The door scene is one of my favorite scenes in the entire thing, but there's so many of them. Yeah. At the same time, they're able to go from these moments of levity to where there's an undercurrent here of real danger. When you look at like what's going on here, as far as like, wait a second, the United States isn't looking to spy on Russia here. They want to read everybody else's mail. And what does this say about the state? All of these different things. It's like it is this curveball of a dark film in so many different ways that you're just like, you kind of lulled into because it's fun. I couldn't help when I'm watching this over again. I watched it with my 12-year-old the other day, and I was like, I just love this cast so much. Like, I just want to hang out with these guys. Like the River Phoenix characters is like, oh, this is who I want to be. Cause I'm probably 15 when this movie comes out in 92. So Phoenix is 5, 6, 7 years older than I am at this point in time, somewhere in that line. He's early 20s, right? I'm looking up to him, right? I just want to hang out with these guys. There's even Aykroyd.
Yeah.
Who is older. Yeah. Is this Aykroyd playing kind of, I don't know. I don't know that I've seen Aykroyd quite like this before, where he's just like, where Poitier's like, I can't talk to you anymore. Just do your job,
Yeah.
And I think this is the first time I ever saw Poitier on screen. Like, I knew Sidney Poitier, right, when I'm 15 in the early 90s. But I never watched Poitier before. So so when I watch him, I'm like, okay, I know this guy is supposed to be something to me. I don't have the intellectual library of films in my head yet to understand who this guy is or why it's a big deal that him and Redford are together.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we haven't even said Ben Kingsley's name.
Oh, there's so, Mary McDonnell is just dazzling. Just
President
dazzling.
Rosalind, man.
Huh?
Right. That's President Rosalind. From,
there's so many people in it. The other thing about Sneakers is I think it taps into there's this early 90s moment. One of the things I write about in my book is time capsules, right? And time capsules conceptually are a snapshot of a moment. And some of the people that are in this film, they're cast so perfectly. Timothy Busfield, the red-haired guy, plays one of the fake NSA agents, right? He's in Field of Dreams as the annoying brother-in-law. He's like, you got to sell the farm, right? Later comes along, and you think, like, you see him in this, you see him in that, and you're like, oh, this guy he's just always annoying. He's always trouble. And then he shows how great of an actor he is when he comes onto West Wing, and he's just like the coolest, like smartest, just the opposite of all of that, and so he's in there. And again, he's not a major character. I mean, he plays an important role, but he doesn't have a lot of screen time. So just all those choices. And then you have these giants like Poitier who, yeah, like you said, playing with Dan Aykroyd, they have this great chemistry, just everywhere you turn. So
Busfield gets maybe in my mind, like the best quote of the film. Right, when he's like, when Redford's like, you guys are the other guys on the other end of the line, and Busfield's like, no, that's the FBI. Like, no, that's the CIA. It's like, oh, okay, we don't trust anybody in this movie, right? And it's so good, man, yeah. I have to ask you though. We talk about records and things like that. There is a word early on that I actually had a hard time understanding. What is a fax?
FAX.
I was like, as I was watching this film, I was like, you watch these movies, like I was saying the other day, I'm not prepared to admit that this movie is 32 years old.
Yeah.
No, when was the last time you used a fax machine though? It was like
there was a college where I worked in the past 10 years, I think, that had one, and I think I was doing something. There was, at that time, at least, there were certain governmental functions around like passports and visas and those kinds of things. Or maybe I was communicating with a foreign government because I was going to do some research there or something. And like pretty much the easiest, most reliable, solid way to do it was a fax, because like you send a piece of paper, somebody gets the piece of paper and it's right there. They don't have to log in and then check their phone and then get the code. And I mean, we basically, I'm not going to rail against the tech companies, at least at this point, but I had a moment of clarity recently where I was like, they have somehow managed to turn me into a protagonist in a computer-based thriller circa 1994, just to get to my own bank account. Like, I have to have 3 gadgets. I can't just have the password. No. That's the great thing about these movies, right? Well, you can't just have the password. You can have the retinal scan, and you got to have the voice passport. Like, that's us now. That's another thing that Sneakers did. People don't necessarily process it this way, but Sneakers showed us what our life was going to be like as everyday people, just trying to access things that were ours, that were on the other side of a barricade that tech companies put up. That's us now.
This film is so incredibly prescient, where it is like if we just nailing all the way down like to the computer dating. As the guy who was literally swiping this morning, I was like left, right, left, like throw the phone off the wall, and see that's like, oh my God. Like they are, I mean, it's like they're calling their shots here for what's to come. And you talk about this being part of a film that's like, kind of distrusting the government and stuff like that. We can also talk about like the ideas, right? You said, going back to 94, I'm thinking about like The Net, the Sandra Bullock film and stuff like that. There's a whole slew of films, right, that are just like all this information floating around, and what do we do about it? Yeah. This hysteria, this growing concern. And now it feels like we are just prisoners to the machine.
Mm-hmm. Right? Well, we've kind of accepted it, right? Like I love to show, one of the things I loved, I just taught this class on the Cold War in the spring, and I love to show my students the trailer of The Net, like just the trailer. And they're cracking up, right? Because literally the things that in 1995 were things to fear in a thriller are just everyday life now. Like all your data being accessible by all of these strangers, sort of the way that a person can be isolated by their online life taking over their quote unquote real life. I mean, it was just like one thing after another, like, well, what will happen if they get this or they have that? It's just sort of everyday life. So the net is a great one for sort of looking at how quickly we went from we have to protect our privacy to like, okay, well, we still should protect our privacy, but they're giving me this free stuff, so I'm going to hand over this and that. And then, of course, something that my students in college now it doesn't loom large in their awareness, but the Patriot Act just really changed everything in terms of people feeling kind of hopeless about being able to protect their data and their private lives because, at that point, the U.S. government just came out and said, like, this is all our stuff now. This is all ours. And they linked it to security and all of that. So, those moments are interesting to me in terms of how our consciousness changes in relation to the promises that are being made to us through and around data.
Well, say like in 1992 when this film comes out, we don't have the word influencer, right? You're talking about the idea of our private lives and things like that. Mm-hmm. And now you actually have people who have gone 180 degrees the opposite direction, right? Yeah. Who are putting themselves, and I really worry about this, because of the social media aspect of HATM and my own scholarships really kind of emerged out of that. Mm. Like, how much am I living versus how much am I, putting on a show for other people? Mm. Am I just giving the highlights? And, I'll tell you, this is almost an invitation now to get hacked. It's like, I feel like there's so much information out there about me already.
Yeah.
It's not that hard to figure out. If you want me, it's just like there's some guy out there or gal, whoever, who can come get me at this point. Like, you want to know what street I grew up on? That's easy to find. You want to know my favorite color, my grandfather's last name, right. My mom's occupation, whatever it is,
right.
It's there. There are pictures of it.
All the security questions, basically.
Oh, absolutely. And I was on those dating apps the other day, and the young lady kept asking me all these questions about my. I was like, oh, here you go. No, if it sounds Russian, swipe left. That's basically out here this close to Denver. Yeah. We talked about characters in this film. There's another character though here, San Francisco. I was thinking about this, right? And you're talking about the rise of tech, stuff like that. Of all places, this is not a surprise that this film is set in San Francisco, right? In 1992, they're making it, I guess, in 91 or so. Can you talk a little bit about like the importance of San Francisco to this story? I mean, it's not a coincidence. They could have put this in Boise, but it's here. Why San Francisco? What does San Francisco have to say, and why is that so important to how we understand tech and what these folks are trying to say in the early 90s?
Yeah, I mean, the Bay Area has long been a high tech hub, and so of course Palo Alto, UC Berkeley. I mean, these are places where everything from physics to physics and mathematics. To the railroads, even back in the 19th century, some of that wealth and power being concentrated there. You have the shipping industry coming through San Francisco as a major port. But the thing I would highlight mainly, and this is a book that really inspired me when it came out. Rebecca Solnit is a great Bay Area writer and thinker. She wrote a book called River of Shadows: Edward Muybridge and the Technological Wild West. And basically, if you go back to Leland Stanford, the namesake and founder of Stanford University, he was funding back in the mid to late 1800s what we would now call this high tech research, right? It's not a coincidence that this is where Google is founded, right? It goes back to you can look in the late 1800s. He's funding these instantaneous photography or high speed photography experiments with this really, really quirky character named Edward Muybridge. So these are if you ever seen the images of like a horse running or a woman carrying a bucket of water, and there's sort of these multiple shots. Yeah. Basically, he invented the technical foundations of cinema, because what he did was he had like a horse run, and he had these cameras set up with these gates, and it would trigger the image to be taken. And, there were some chemistry innovations that made this possible. So he basically created, like a proto film reel. What he's really trying to do is capture what motion looked like, but what they realized after that is like, but if you string these together and you make it like a zoetrope, right, or a flip book animation, these are the foundations of cinema, basically. So all of that is indicative of a massive concentration of wealth, a massive investment in technical innovation occurring around the Bay Area going back 150 years and more. So that continues up through, of course, the 20th century when you have the birth of computing. You have places like UC Berkeley. The Pacific Northwest was also an important place. It's not a coincidence that Bill Gates comes out of Pacific Northwest. So it's just a deep concentration of technical workers and technological investment.
I think I was really thinking about when I watched this is, I watched this when it first comes out, and I don't think I saw this in the theater, but I'm catching this on HBO pretty shortly afterwards, right?
Yeah.
Film opens in 1969, which is not that far removed from 1992. Now that I think about it,
yeah.
But was hacking a thing? Like what's going on with government security, or mid-century as we start to move forward?
I mean, if my memory serves, computers are pretty big still, like in the mid 20th century, big in terms of like their physical size.
Right.
And I think by 1969, you have the ARPANET, sort of the forerunner of the internet. But there are only a handful of computers hooked up to it. I would defer to some of my colleagues who know more about this, but if I had to bet, like, money, I would say the things that they were doing in December 1969, I don't think things were connected in that way. They also don't go into technical detail about precisely how they're getting to where they're getting. They're just like, do you want to empty Richard Nixon's bank account? You do have, by the early 70s, they reference this, and I talk about it in my book, the first place they go to, Cosmo and Bishop at the beginning, is the Federal Reserve electronic funds transfer station, which is in Culpeper, Virginia. That was, up and running by the early 70s and was a way of like accessing and transferring funds. But I am not aware of instances of hacking that look like, there were some early viruses and what they called phreaking to manipulate the phone system. So you could like use tones to trick it into giving you free long distance phone calls. Like a lot of that stuff, like, was happening, but pretty early. But I am not aware of anybody doing things. And I looked a little bit into this because when I rewatched it, I was like, 1969, there's no way.
Right.
And I looked a little bit into it, and I wasn't able to find anything that suggested that you could do that. And maybe that's a way of them saying they were ahead of the curve. But if it really was true that they were like a handful of computers even hooked up in this way, you can't be ahead of materiality. Like it's either linked or it's not.
Well, I think it's like one of my favorite tropes that I see in films. Like there's always the hacker guy who does something. Yeah. Right. It's in Spider-Man, I'm the guy in the chair. Right. It's like there's always the guy who can do whatever, and it almost speaks to like the audience's ability just to take that for granted. Like, oh, okay, there's a guy out here who can do sorcery. Yeah. Over here, and. Yeah. It's a necessary way to move a plot forward. Yeah, and I don't have a problem with it. And honestly, it makes me think about a colleague of mine who's a physicist. And once I went to him and I said, so when you watch a Marvel movie, what's your experience? Like, does it make you like, does it bother you, these things that they're doing? Because it's so inaccurate. He's like, it is so far removed from anything like actual physics that I don't even relate it to physics because it's clearly fantasy. It's clearly a fantasy. And I think, this is not as far out because, things that they're doing were definitely very possible soon after that. But we give it a pass because, I've known some hackers, or I've known people who have done like white hat hackers, right? I probably have known some other kinds of hackers and not known it, but they're like, a movie about actual hacking would be the most boring
42-hour affair of failure and difficulty, and like, because sometimes you just have to have the password, and if you don't, like, that's it. I mean, obviously it's changed a bit with some of the AI tools and all that, but all that is to say, I'm fine with 1969 maybe being a year where they couldn't quite do that yet in with that kind of speed. It's okay.
Hey, listen, it's the reason why we Indiana Jones. Otherwise, nobody wants to watch a film about archaeology, right? Because it is.
No offense to the archaeologists, but
No, absolutely. I want to offend the archaeologists because they write an APA. It drives me nuts. I'm a Chicago man for life. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's the thing. People sometimes ask me about, HATM or the pod and stuff like that. I'm like, I am so not interested in rivet counting. Yeah. This idea is like, oh, there was no this at the Battle of that, or like, it's a story.
Yeah, totally.
It's fine. It's in the realm of belief. Yeah, I can set everything else aside.
I do wonder what school that was, though, because that was a lot of snow. And I don't know nothing about Bay Area meteorology. Like December.
Because he says he goes to Canada.
He goes to Canada, but
afterwards. So are we assuming that they were in the Bay Area?
No, I'm not. I'm not. I just wonder if there was a campus they had in mind, or I don't know. I mean, it's like a question that's probably no answer to, but I just looked at the architecture and I was like, where would that be? And the snow, I was like, because the snow to me is like, would it look like that ever in San Francisco? Like
Syracuse, someplace like that, maybe upstate New York.
Michigan was pretty far ahead of the curve in terms of computing.
Great school.
That would make sense and easy to get to Canada. There probably would have been more snow than that in December, but they were one of the few. By the 60s, I think more places had. But anyway,
you know what? If you're listening in right now and you want to like tell us like what school they go, like this is a great question. Where were they? Yeah, someplace Chicago, someplace maybe. No, because they weren't in the city, right?
Well, he goes out for pizza.
Right.
He goes out for pizza. I don't know. The snow always just throws me off. Like, and now I'm just like, I don't know where this is. But I guess we could probably do a deep dive on what was happening in 1969. But again, they're not necessarily hewing to.
It's gonna drive me nuts. Now, I'm gonna have to know at some point in time now.
The snow works cinematically, right? Because it's like, this is what forces them to then. Not flip a coin, but the equivalent, right? Who's going to?
Because we can't both go out.
Who's going to be the loser who has to go out through the snow and get the pizza? So it was good.
No, it's a good. But again, as a storyteller, as a writer, you're talking about it a little bit earlier on about, hey, we've got to figure out a way to get everybody in the van, right?
Yeah.
What's the plausible reason to get people to send only one guy out to go get pizza?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's gotta be still okay. Well, that means we got to set. This can't be University of Miami, right, or wherever, right? So it's those little pieces as you're constructing these stories that makes all of these small little adjustments. Just like in a lot of ways, just like when you're creating your book, thinking through how do I explain this to an audience in a way that makes sense, whether it's a film or someone who's reading or whatever. It's like I like thinking about the processes.
Yeah,
that happens there. Do you have favorite parts of this film?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I love anytime there is a gadget that mechanically types things. I'm a sucker for that. And I don't know if this thing really exists or not, but the thing that converts the typing to Braille for Mother,
that
thing is so awesome. I don't know.
You know what scene I'm thinking about right now, right? Which is like where they show the screen through Whistler's
that shot is
sunglasses where just
A++. I mean, that's again, how can we show nonsensical whatever it is computer language, right, in an interesting way? How can we make that a moment? And they so yeah, I like that part. Favorite parts, I think I just remember being like 12 and seeing this and my mind being blown when Whistler, I may have called him Mother just now, but Whistler says, the black box is on the table. And they're like, I hate to break it to you, but you're blind, and he's like, and he sort of says, play it again. Listen, don't look, listen. That just blew my mind. God, there's so many things. I already talked about the motion capture and the heat sensors. I already talked about the door moment. The thing that actually really struck me this time rewatching was the anagram opening credits.
Yes.
They basically snuck like absurdist poetry into a big budget Hollywood movie credit. I didn't, if I had more time, I would have actually seen if it all checked out like neatly.
Mhm.
But did you see some of those phrases? It was like
Well,
unbelievable.
can I tell you? So I had forgotten about that
Yeah, me
as I
too.
sat down, right? Um, I was thinking in some ways, and I don't remember what I was expecting. Usually, I've watched so many movies. I've got a pretty good understanding as far as what to expect on the credits.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten that opening, and it's so well laid out, especially because it coincides with the crossword scene, which happens at the exact same time that the
Mhm.
Whistler thing is happening, which is chef's kiss, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so cool.
It's so
But I
cool.
was thinking, it was weird. You said it because I was thinking about the film poster,
Mhm.
which is, in my mind, it's a really good poster.
Totally.
But I had forgotten the opening credits here. And I tweeted about this the other night. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, we're doing it. And I'd just shown my television. Everybody says, everybody starts tweeting at me.
There's
Too many
something
of
about
us.
these moments too. You're talking about just wanting to hang out with these people.
Yeah.
So there's the characters themselves, but then there was and there's it's also specific to that era before everybody had a phone, right? So if you were hanging
Mhm.
out with people, there was a landline, but like nobody was getting a call on their cell phone. So you could have these extended periods of time where you're just like interacting. And that moment where they're playing Scrabble and Redford's like C-Tech astronomy, and they just dump the board and everybody starts pitching in and trying to figure it out. There are aspects of that are, I think, probably a little too neat with the great score and all of that, where it's like,
Sure.
okay, and then he figures this out, he figures this out. I don't care because I love it. I'm nostalgic about it.
It works.
And it's well done. It's great. And it's just so fun. But what I was gonna say was there are early '90s movies that have that quality that you talked about, where it's the characters and the actors, but it's also something about late at night. I mean, some of those scenes in like A Few Good Men, for instance, where they're trying to figure out their strat, and it's just like, I want to have Chinese takeout with them at 1 a.m. I want to be riding on yellow legal pads. I want to be like breaking my brain trying to figure out how to win the unwinnable case. It's just, you just want, it's because it's like college plus a party plus plus a brain teaser plus it's just like, it's just so compelling. It's so compelling. The lighting, everything that they do,
They sell this
early
idea
capacity.
of like working late at night, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They do this on the West Wing. Like I want to,
Yes.
right? I want to live at DC and be awake at 2 a.m. Like all the other offices are closed, but mine is open and I'm doing the work with my friends because we've got to figure out the thing
Yep.
because this is who we are and this is what we do.
Yep. The West Wing is the apex of that.
Thank you. Right? Like I want to live in DC like during Christmas time because I want to go to a ball and you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Now they'd all be sitting around their phones scrolling.
Yeah, I mean,
Right? I won't be that guy, but
it would be different. Well, then that's the thing, right? It's like I'm not bringing this up to say like this time is worse or that was better, even though that was better in certain ways. But there's something specific about that moment because it wasn't completely detechnologized. There was some technology, right? It was coming in. So there's a mix of analog and digital in these interesting ways. And there are reasons why so many of us hopped on the internet. It was amazing. It was like there's a reason why it exploded. And it wasn't just forced on us. There were things about it that were so cool. And so I think going back to that time where the tools were tools in the context of our life rather than our life sort of is fit into the tools, whether work life, personal life, or whatever. And, I'm not taking a position on that one way or another, but like that feeling is something that people desire. And even people that are born digital now, have you heard about this startup? I think it's called No Place. It's being sold as MySpace for Gen Z. So it's a stripped down social media platform that really sort of tries to get back to something that the internet had before that it's lost as all of the platforms basically become each other and become all the same. I haven't been on it. I'm not on any social media, so I don't really know like what it offers. I was definitely on MySpace, and when MySpace started, I was all over it. I loved it.
Did you have the music playing on your MySpace
Yeah, I
page?
did. I used to make music back then too, so I used it for that, sort of like it was useful for musicians. And like, I mean, all that stuff, CD Baby, like all those sites that like made it easy to be an independent musician. That stuff was great. It was great.
Yeah. It felt like a different world. And it's like, here we are, guys, like nostalgia, waxing poetic about a time, God.
But I think to understand the
ago.
movie, right, to understand how this movie works and why it works on us, these things are true. Like you can take a value position one way or another, like innovation's always good. Let's let AI take over. It's better than humans. You can take any of those positions you want. The things that you can't argue about is that human consciousness has been shifted through these technologies being embedded in so many layers of our awareness and our social relations. And so a movie that comes out before that shift hits people with brains that were built in that environment. And then even people who see it now are seeing this moment that no matter how much money you have, no matter how smart you are, you cannot get back to. The world has changed.
Thank you.
Cannot experience it if you wanted to because it's not there anymore. So that's in order to understand how this movie works and hits us. I think that's the thing you just got to understand.
Okay, thank you so much for saying that because as a guy, I'm tail end of Gen X, right? And I always felt like I was the Zennial thing is probably more accurate for me because I never felt like I belonged to the millennial. I sure as heck wasn't cool enough to be Gen X, right? And you go back and watch this film now. I remember watching it as a kid. It's like, okay, cool. This is what's going on. And now you look through this film as like this nostalgic, gaze.
Yeah.
Because they, in this film, have a sense of what's coming. We know what's coming to them.
Right.
Everything's about to change. And, it's not just that. We're about to change too, right? Like as young men and so forth, like we're about to go through this growth and so forth. And I love what you say about this idea that there's no one going back here.
There's not.
So now you watch this film, you're not just enjoying it. It's like you were imparting that feeling you had when you were 15, 16, 17, whatever. The other part I wanted to ask you about, because I want to come back to this later on, I can't not talk about the end with James Earl Jones. What do you want? What do you want?
Yeah.
And River Phoenix, I just want a number. It's the best line.
Probably an HR violation at this point, but in 92, it was just, it was just sweet.
I get the sense that the federal government, at least according to this film, was committing a lot of violations. This entire thing is like, that's the minimalist thing, right?
Yeah. But it's brilliant writing. I mean, it's just like...
It's fun. And it's so true to character, too.
Totally.
He's clueless. And she's like, you can have anything in the world you want. All you want is my number. Here you go. I mean, it helps that he looks like River Phoenix, right?
Yeah, that doesn't hurt.
Are there parts of this film that drive you nuts?
I wouldn't say drive me nuts. There are parts of it that are, there's some tricks, right, that everybody used back then, right? When they first haul Robert Redford in and they give the resume of everybody in his crew, like that was a thing that you did in movies in the 80s and the 90s, right? And you just run it down. It's kind of cheating from a writing perspective, but
everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Here's who they are. This would take so long to actually do it through drama and dramatic choices. We're just going to give you the info. But I mean, I just love it so much. But as for terms of what drives me crazy, I don't think there's anything that drives me crazy. I think there are things there are some moments that I kind of have double consciousness as I watch because I'm like loving it. And then I'm like, I wonder how someone who hadn't seen this before would see it. Someone who's like 22 or 25 or 12, right? Who like was my age when I watched it. There are some moments that are a little, they're just very, very Hollywood. They're very, very sort of like, the score comes in, just like, oh, what about this? And it gets a little stylized in a sort of mainstream way, but it doesn't keep me from just like laughing out loud and muttering to myself, I love this fucking movie as I'm watching it.
It's so good.
None of it really gets in the way.
Thank you. Can I give you my hot take? The thing I was picking up on here. I don't know. And I hate to criticize this film because you saw my email when you suggested this film. I was like, absolutely, let's go. Right. Yeah. I was all in. Sometimes people suggest films, and I'm like, hey, how about no? But are we sure that Robert Redford and Mary McDonnell really like the chemistry there? Is it romantic enough? Do you get the sense? I went back and did the thing. God, and I feel bad because he's 55 in this film, and I had to know. It's like she's 40.
Okay.
I don't care about the age gap. Well, you're a consenting adult. I don't care, right? Yeah. But I was trying to figure out why is this not? I didn't feel like there was any heat between the two of them. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Maybe that's just me reading too much into it. The film works. It's fine. She's constantly like, we're not getting back together. It's clear that they are, but the characters never kiss.
Yep. So is this a question about them deciding to make that the story between those two, or were you just like, I don't even see enough sparks to believe that they ever would have gotten together? Yeah,
you know what? I think when I was younger, I would have like, okay, cool, right? But going now watching the film was like, is there enough? Like watching Battlestar Galactica, right? Watching her in that with James Edward almost like, I'm in, right? I buy this.
Yeah.
I don't know. I do like the idea of like this doesn't have to be a love story, right? There can be like an affection there. We're citing this, but this is about something else. Mm-hmm. If anything, this is the love story between Cosmo and Bishop, and Cosmo feeling like he's the jilted lover.
Totally. Yeah, that's why he doesn't kill him. That's why he doesn't. I mean, he frames him, but it's not really to send him to jail. It's kind of to get him back on the criminal side. So he's trapped with Cosmo, and he can't go back to a legal life. So is the question like if I feel that way about it too? I mean, I don't see. I think there's one moment. So I'll give a counterpoint to your hot take.
Go for it.
There's one moment. It's not heat so much, but it is feeling. And Mary McConnell is just like, I mean, Mary McDonnell. She's just great.
I love her.
There's a moment where he comes to the apartment. He's just sort of survived the getting knocked out twice situation. Comes in. And she's cleaning him up. And he's like, I'm sorry. And she's like, yeah, it's okay. And he stops. He's like, I'm sorry. And she sort of like becomes unguarded for a minute.
Yeah.
That makes me believe there was a connection there, that there was some intimacy there. But but to your point, that's it. I mean, that's kind of the moment, There's another moment where you can see she's a bit charmed by him when they get to the, there's a moment, maybe around the Scrabble scene or something. She's like, oh no, I'm fine. Oh no, not Scrabble scene. It's by the end when James Earl Jones is giving people stuff. She's like, oh no, I'm good. I'm fine.
Like this is the ride I'm on.
But no, I get you. I hear you. I have what's maybe a hotter take. Now this is taking it into very speculative territory.
Go for it.
Also,
let's speculate.
But also, there's maybe some evidence for it. Okay.
We don't even need evidence. We can conjecture. Let's go.
One thing that feels really good at the end of the movie is that the black box goes to the NSA, but Redford has removed the microchip from it. So the U.S. government won't have it. Do we trust Redford's character with the chip? Or is he going to rebuild the black box and do entrepreneurial things, shady things? Will he be able to resist? Like, he just holds it up. Like, where does it go from there?
See, here's the thing. I think Redford is okay. Here's what I worry about. I worry about Redford leaving it laying around, and then like Aykroyd getting his hands on it and start like Aykroyd and Whistler start
doing
playing
good.
around with it. Let's help out. Oh wait, towards the end of the film, don't we see that exact thing where they're talking about like the Republican Party lost all of its money?
I read that as, that's interesting. Because I read that now you're feeding into my speculative reading.
Absolutely.
I read that as the NSA was granting the wish of Whistler, who wanted goodwill and peace on earth. The NSA got that done.
I love that line. It's like,
yeah.
With the United States government, we don't do that.
Yeah. That's all we do. Yeah. So
James Earl Jones just owning the few minutes of screen time he's in this film.
Oh yeah.
He's just like
he's a giant. And then, this is, of course, a preview of him then being in the Jack Ryan movies, the Harrison Ford Jack Ryan movies, right? Where
Oh, yeah.
he's all-time great, OG CIA dude, like Greer.
Oh, my God. Have you watched the new series with Krasinski and Wendell Pierce as Greer?
Oh, yeah.
What did you think about Wendell Pierce as Greer?
Oh, I love it. I mean,
I was so in.
Love it. Yeah. It was funny too, because he's so the bunk to me from The Wire that like it took me a minute to adjust to him being Greer. And I think the way that they did it too, where, he's like grumpy and gruff and sort of like, you don't know what his backstory is. But once he actually like some action happens and he's in it, you're like, oh, this guy is fierce. Like,
yeah,
he's not athletic. He's not rowing on the Charles River every morning or whatever, but he is cold blooded.
Okay. So the thing I like about Wendell Pierce, right, especially like him, welcome to Jason and Brian talk about Jack Ryan. Let's go. He doesn't try to recreate James Earl Jones.
No,
right. He's just going to do his own thing. But he also has the screen presence, like you're talking about. He's got to have enough. I don't have the right word.
Yeah.
To counterbalance Jack Ryan kind of doing his own thing, and Krasinski I liked a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't done a Jack Ryan on these podcasts yet, and I'm dying to do a Red October because
classic
Cold War submarines. Connery is absolutely. No, I love Pierce in this. In that, and I love Jones here. He's so good. I want to ask you about this. We have this section here. My friend Lauren Lesab Shepard, a fellow UNC book author, when she came up with this idea of like what the Florida, and what happens if we set sneakers in Florida? Like, do things radically change? What happens when we go from the Bay Area to Florida for this movie? And you can set this film in any time period, by the way.
Okay. I'm thinking that it gets a little more ridiculous, maybe a lot more ridiculous. And it gets a little almost Die Hard 2-y with some meteorological stuff. So something about a storm, like there's a, I don't know, like some way of either manipulating the weather, or, I mean, it would just be a completely different movie because, as you know, when you go to Florida, everything changes. So,
it's home. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think there might be something related to some kind of impending storm and a heist, and there being that's kind of as far as I got, because I think from there it gets really, really weird. But I think the other thing I think about with Florida, and maybe you can help me with this,
please.
But Florida is, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's like 2 feet of dirt and then you hit water, right?
Correct.
So the infrastructure is different, right? Where like fiber optic cables and, you've got satellites and phone line, like all that stuff would have to be configured a little bit differently in Florida, I think. That could change some things. And you've also got the angle of, rather than being the Bay Area and that like tech hub kind of thing, you've got a lot of really rich kind of environments in terms of like technology and politics. It's like South Florida and the Cuba connection. You've got all the amusement parks where you could have some really, really wacky stuff happen.
Oh, you could do it. I'm constantly shocked. So we do all these watch parties, stuff like that. We don't see Florida in enough films, and it's such a weird place. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm a Florida historian. Like I've been trying to make sense of it for the last 10 years. I can't, but I don't know, man. It's easy to make fun of. Like being from Kentucky originally. Thank God for Florida, because Florida like came on. This idea of Florida man is completely like no one makes fun of my people anymore. It's great. Now they make fun of my children's people. Yeah. My older son was born in West Palm Beach. So for those of you who are wanting to hack, I can give you his birthday later on. But that actually brings me to a segue here about your own work, because I do want to talk about your book, which I found absolutely fascinating. And talking about this, you're like, I'm just here to see some pictures. I'm like, pictures of what, Brian? And then you're like, you're going into Iron Mountain. And I was thinking about how Florida would be the worst place in the world to store as a repository because of humidity, climate change, saltwater intrusion, all this kind of stuff, and whenever we were first talking, I was thinking about this film Greenland. I don't know if you seen it or not. It's one of those apocalyptic films where they're trying to get to Greenland because there's a meteor, and I think you would dig it. Gerard Butler is in this movie. He's good in it.
He can be
good. I want to
good.
come back to this.
Yeah,
he can be good. Okay, please. What's the film he's done? Den of Thieves.
Den of Thieves. That's what I was going to say. He was great in that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Diet Heat. I love it. Give me another one.
Yeah.
All right. I want to ask you about this. Your book's all about data storage and record keeping and stuff like that. So talk to me a little bit about this. What's the deal here? What's the driving force behind? You can explain your book better than I can. So talk to me a little bit about how we're tying in your book here to this for this particular film. What's the gist here as far as data storage and why we need to care about record keeping?
So as you were saying, the book opens with me going to Iron Mountain, the Iron Mountain National Data Center. And there's
outstanding name for a place. Right?
All kinds of stuff down there, right?
Right.
Every format you can imagine of storing data. And the heart of my concerns was a facility that was at the time owned and operated by Bill Gates for his company Corbis. And so he was preserving tens of millions of photographs in this 10,000 square foot freezer, basically, and digitizing some of them. And the consultant that helped him build this place in a former limestone mine cavern said that the temperature and humidity control would preserve the photos for 10,000 to 15,000 years. And I remember first learning about that and thinking, why would anybody want to preserve anything for 10,000 or 15,000 years? And so what I started to do was look at the history of attempts to preserve data or media artifacts permanently. And that took me into a territory where I'm reading about human beings' relationship with the material world, our relationship to our own mortality. Because what I'd often find these very History Channel type takes where it's human beings have always preserved since the beginning of time. The ancient Egyptians. I was wait a second. The Egyptians did not do this. The Egyptians did not do what we're doing right now. They did something very, very different. So Americans are the most prolific preservers of data ever. And so my question was, how did it become that way? And a lot of it has to do with us believing that keeping data safe will keep us safe, that keeping data, for lack of a better term, alive will in some way keep a trace of us alive even after we die. That creating backups of things that we value will protect them against all the things that, destroy material objects on Earth. And then you've got outer space, of course, being placed. So with sneakers, part of what is going on is we have invested these technological systems and these stores of data, these data banks, they used to call them. Eventually they become data centers, with the power to protect us against our enemies, the secrecy, right? The secrecy, the encryption. And encryption is, of course, an architectural metaphor, right? Because it refers to crypt, which is something that's underground and buried and bunkerfied, if you will, bunkerized, I guess.
I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah, go on.
So what sneakers is doing, what sneakers, the MacGuffin, I guess, or whatever sneakers would be, is that this black box, which supposedly has the computing power, the mathematical power to decrypt anything. So now what happens is the data that we thought kept us safe now threatens to become vulnerable, making us vulnerable, right? So that taps into those mortal fears. And I think, there's a really inspiring media historian named Lisa Geidelman who's written about this. She wrote some stuff with Jonathan Auerbach about microfilm and talked about microfilm having this double capacity to both be the thing that protects us and saves us when it's espionage on behalf of the United States, but also if it can be hid inside of the heel of a shoe and it's the nuclear secrets, it's also the thing that renders us deeply, deeply vulnerable to the Russians, quote unquote. Right.
Right.
So sneakers really plays upon those psychological investments, those feelings of vulnerability as a person and individually, right? Because that's Marty's thing too, right? Marty's life is destroyed if the information about his past gets out. It's all about controlling information on an individual level and then as like a national collective. And then people who, of course, want to take that information and become powerful. Cosmo's got some misguided ideas about like the material infrastructure required to operate the internet and the immaterial world of information as he sees it. But that was a common misconception really up until, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, the New York Times started reporting about data centers, using more electricity than small towns and like, oh, this is all very material, actually. It's not in the cloud up in the sky. So
I want to ask you, well, you said that the United States, we store data like nobody's business.
yeah.
Right? Like that makes sense. Where does this come from? What is this American obsession with keeping records? And we say this knowing that I've got records here on Facebook and Instagram and like the whole world's like access to my stuff. So where's this coming from? This idea is like, we've got to keep all the stuff because Gates went and bought these records. They were already out there.
Yeah.
What's this fascination?
Well, part of it was practical. If you go back to the mid-19th century and the expansion of the railroad, basically what happens is you have the American economy, especially after the Civil War, is industrializing. So now you have extraction of raw materials, you have processing and manufacturing, selling of the goods can actually happen in like far-flung places. They don't have to all be in the same town, right? Because the railroad allows us magnificently speedy transfer of things. Well, once you have that, you also have the sort of birth of the modern American corporation by the 1880s, these massive bureaucratic systems with an army of lawyers to boot right after the Santa Clara decision makes corporations into persons. And so in order for corporations and corresponding to that, the United States government, which also really becomes a federal system after the Civil War in terms of being something that we would recognize as a federal system, you have an explosion of records because people actually can't keep in their heads the things that they need to have. So you need a bureaucracy. Drew Gilpin Faust, the historian, has this great book, This Republic of Suffering, about, in the wake of the Civil War, all of the basically government agencies that were built out in order to administer the veterans benefits and just sort of creating, the federal bureaucracy that we know. So it begins, the United States, in order to become an industrial powerhouse, sort of had to do it. It became possible because of cheap wood pulp paper. There are all these factors that sort of make it possible. Then by the time you get to the 1910s and the 1920s, there's incredible anxiety because a lot of these records were printed on cheap paper. A lot of them were being stored in ways that were, as you can imagine, not the optimal conditions for preserving these things that you might need 5-10 years from now. And then you get to the 1930s and the New Deal, and there's actually federal legislation that requires government agencies and corporations to preserve certain classes of records. So we get all of these retention schedules. You have to save these records legally in case you face litigation. So by the time you get to the 50s, you have companies in New York City where most of the office space that they're renting at exorbitant rates is dedicated to just holding records. So then you get highway system, you get the ability to sort of outsource that record storage, that secure data storage services to companies like Iron Mountain, which was founded in the 50s, saving money in office space, et cetera. So it's a combination of, as I said, practicality, the human brain not really being built to hold all of that, and then the investment in technology and automation and just our entanglement with what I end up calling the data complex, which is our reliance upon these technological and database systems really to operate our daily life. It expands and expands because every time there's a threat to the security of the country or to whatever some segment of the populace holds dear, it increases that anxiety. And one of the ways that we historically as Americans have stabilized ourselves is to create a backup plan, and backup plans mean backup documents, and backup documents mean backup documents in multiple places and multiple formats. with multiple telecommunication systems linking them. So it just expands and expands and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And we never actually feel safe. We just feel more anxious in different ways. And we just build the data complex out some more.
You say this, my laptop crashed while I was writing my master's thesis.
Oh,
I lost one paragraph. I had, dude,
good.
If there is a higher power, I used up every last bit of whatever on that one thing because I lost everything else in the laptop.
Oh, wow.
For some reason.
How was that saved? I don't understand.
God only knows.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I know that I lost a paragraph, half page, something like that. It was recent, right? Like, so I was, and I had that thing almost done. And oh God, talk about terrifying. And like people ask, oh, why don't you save to the cloud and this, that, and the other? And you talk about this in the book. And, now that I'm in the process of writing my own book, I'm like, I've got stuff saved everywhere.
Yeah.
And the other problem, Brian, is like, we see this in memes all the time. I don't have another password in me. I can't do it. People are like, oh, we have, we have your passwords. I'm like, can you tell me what they are? I need them now,
Yeah.
I get into an app on my phone and they ask me for password. I'm like, that's why I have the app.
I know.
So I don't have to have a password. This is the one place I shouldn't have a password.
Well, some of the things that are being protected, it's like, honestly, what is the worst thing that could happen if somebody gets a hold of my Verizon app? I mean, what are they going to do to me? They're going to send an iPhone 15 to my house and I'll get charged for it. Like, why the security? What's going to happen?
I'm a historian working for the federal government. There's not that much you can take from me to begin with. Can you just make my life easier? I want to ask you though about the creation of this book though, because one of the things I really like to talk about is like, where did the formation of this book come from? Like, and then how do you interest? I love when authors do this. We're in Iron Mountain with you, like right from the very beginning. But like, how does this book take shape, and how do you research this idea? Like, because none of this felt very intuitive to me. I was like, how are you getting there? Intellectually as you were writing this, like. So can you talk us a little bit about where this book came from and then like how you went around constructing it?
Well, I was in graduate school. I was doing my Ph.D. and I was taking a class called Photography and After with this amazing, brilliant scholar in history of art. But she did her Ph.D. in rhetoric at Berkeley and did a lot of work on media and time-based art. Really, Chris Paulson is her name. So she was a big mentor to me. And that was the class in which I wrote a paper about Bill Gates's Corbis facility. And so she had us reading essays going back to the beginnings of photography. So we were reading things written about Daguerre and Niepce and, Edgar Allan Poe writing about seeing a daguerreotype for the first time.
Oh, this is cool.
Oliver Wendell Holmes, who had invented a stereoscopic viewer, he has this essay called The Stereoscope and the Stereograph that was published in the Atlantic Monthly. And he's saying, eventually we will have the Imperial Stereographic Library where you can go and look at a 3D image of anything, the Parthenon, the Great Wall of China, herds of buffalo on the plains. Once we have that, you can just tear the Parthenon down and kill all the buffalo and get rid of us. We have the image of it. We don't need the real thing anymore. So there are all these like sort of strange ideas where preservation, and photography was being talked about a lot as a preservative technology, right? It's taking something from the flow of time that otherwise is going to decay and change, and it's freezing it like Han Solo, right? So that it's eternal. And they didn't know yet that photographs decay too yet. And also photographs at the beginning were made out of metal. So they actually were pretty durable.
They don't know anything about carbonite,
So part of the reason probably why when you look at the book, the stuff doesn't seem immediately connected is because the way that I conceived of it, I put preservation at the center. But the way that scholarly knowledge has tended to be produced, at least up until the time I was writing the book, was that you can read about architectural preservation, you could read about food preservation, you could read about preservation of film and photography, you could read about conservation in art and other sort of museum materials. You could not read anything that connected those practices. But I was in an interdisciplinary program, so all I had to do was ask a good question and then answer it, and I was allowed to go wherever I needed to go. So I read about taxidermy, I read about food canning, I read about preservation of historical architecture, I read about anything related to preservation. I read about, and as it turns out, these things are related in the ways that people preserve a photograph. You have gelatin that's in there. Well, guess what? That's something we put in our food too. And so that's related to like refrigeration, all that. So, so anyway, that was sort of the beginnings of it conceptually, but still it's really not clear how this is going to become a book that anybody's going to read or buy. So that was my dissertation, was really writing, a chapter on the Crypt of Civilization, a chapter on the Westinghouse time capsule, these projects that were precursors to Corbis, really the first projects where people said, we are going to preserve microfilm permanently. And we know that because they've just carried out the first government scientific studies from 1929 to 1938 that prove that these things can be preserved that long. And then, of course, going to the Cold War, looking at the bunkers, the securitization, the expansion of the data complex. So I spent 5 years researching, going to archives, writing the dissertation, taking courses and then writing dissertation. I finished in 2014. And then I worked on it for a few more years. And then I sent a proposal to UNC Press, and there was interest, but they're like, this is really 2 books. Cause I was doing some other things in the book when it was in that form. They're like, write this one or this one. So then I reformatted the proposal again, narrowed it down to the one thing, sent it again. The acquisitions editor was interested, but the executive editor wasn't convinced. So then, I don't know.
Oh, man.
And, somewhere in here too, I'd also been like, why don't I try to get a literary agent and make this like a trade book? So I'd already like sort of reconceptualized it that way. That wasn't happening. I had some good contacts with some agents that didn't work, but it gave me a different idea. But I was so kind of like, I don't know, at that point I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I am just going to stop. I'm going to stop. And then I'm just going to write this book the way I want to write it. Right. Because the head editor at UNC Press, the executive editor, had asked all these really great questions that I would need to answer if I was going to publish with them. And I didn't have the answers. And I was like, I don't even know that I want to find those answers. And so I was like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through the manuscript and I am going to I'm going to copy and then paste into a new document all of the moments in the manuscript that feel the way that I want the entire book to feel. And I think it added up to about 12 pages. And I was like, that's my starting point. I'm starting from this.
Dude, I was like, go. And then you're at 12. Oh,
it went from 250 to 12. And I was like,
you're scaring me, man.
This is how I want this whole book to be. And I was like, I'm going to write it for me. I don't know what's going to happen. Is it going to get published? Is not, but like, I have to figure out what this book is. And, the good thing is, as these literal years are passing, Elon Musk is doing all kinds of weird shit. Jeff Bezos is doing all kinds of weird shit. And these things become the later chapters that were not a part of the dissertation because it hadn't happened yet.
Right.
So then here I am, I'm writing, I'm doing this sort of like almost like lyric essay style for a good amount of the stuff. Cause I still have all the research. I'm just putting in a different vibe. And I think it's about a year later or something. And one day I'm writing and I'm like, I don't even remember what those questions were that the editor asked me. Like those questions that I was like, I was like, what were those? So I like go and I search in my email and I pull them up and I had answered all of them.
Are you kidding me?
So then I was like, okay, let me rewrite the book proposal again. So I wrote the book proposal again. I sent it back and they were like, this is it.
That's awesome.
And then I was, off to the races. So still had some more writing to do, peer review process. I, had some moments where they're like, read this book, add this, do that. But it was a really fun ride and challenging. And then there was a pandemic. So that changed the timeline, but it also meant that during the pandemic, I just got up really early and I wrote every day for a long time.
Were you in the position where you were worried about like tenure or anything like that, where you had like a ticking clock in your head, where you were concerned? Was that affecting or anything along those lines too?
No, I had the opposite, and I think that's part of what led this book to be what it was. You know, I had positions that were very good positions, I had two positions in a row that were at colleges that don't have a tenure system. So they would do these like really long-term contracts. You'd still go from like assistant professor to associate professor or whatever, but they were like, if you want to write poems and have that be your that element, that research element, if you want to write peer-reviewed articles, if you want to write a book that's on UNC Press, if you want to write a book that's on Grey Wolf, whatever you want to do, just do it. But do something that has some kind of impact. Do something that people like care about. So that was like it was a huge gift to spend like several years and in faculty positions where I felt, economically, just like job wise secure, but I was able to write the way that I wanted to write and nobody cared. Nobody cared what it looked like. They were like, oh, got published there. Great.
All right. You said the thing I have to ask you about, Grey Wolf. What are you referencing?
Well, Grey Wolf is just like one of the coolest publishers of nonfiction on the face.
Really?
Oh, okay. Grey Wolf is based in Minneapolis. Yeah.
Okay.
They're a publisher.
Dude, I went to school in Minnesota and I didn't know that.
Oh yeah,
I feel like dumb.
Like there's a book called Citizen, an American Lyric by Claudia Rankin.
Okay.
So they've just done some things that really push the boundaries in terms of experimenting with form. But they published this book by Kevin Young, who's the poetry editor of the New Yorker, but he's written nonfiction books. He wrote this massive book called The Gray Album on the Blackness of Blackness. And it just goes all over the place from jazz to hip hop to, T.S. Eliot writing letters in like basically imitating like blackface minstrels with Ezra Pound and them having these nicknames. I mean, it's like it's formally, it's just incredible. So I think for my money, Grey Wolf is just like one of the coolest. It's just one of the coolest.
I gotta check them out.
Yeah. And I have some friends who've published with them and they just do things that are just really, really rad.
All right. We've been talking about books. What are 3 books that have influenced you? Like, who do you like? We've talked, you've name dropped a few of them. And
yeah.
It's like, I love talking about other people's work and professors, especially you're talking about the art history professor. Yeah. Dude, I love hearing stories about people who like lift other people up, who were like the awesome professor. So I'm so glad you did. Give me 3 books that you dig.
Yeah, so I mentioned one, Rebecca Solnit, River of Shadows. That was huge. She is just a brilliant essayist and thinker. That was one. Another that influenced me, especially when you're talking about going to these facilities, was Tom Vanderbilt's book Survival City. Subtitle is like Adventures in the Atomic Ruins of America. And then the third one, I was going to say, one that really inspired me. I don't know that I didn't do precisely what that book was doing, but Richard Rhodes' Making of the Atomic Bomb is just really one of my favorite books of all time.
Let me ask you this. Here's my penultimate question for you. You, sir, have just turned over the crypt machine, the black box. What are you asking for in return? Are you asking for Winnebago? What are you going for?
That's a good
Winnebago's the great line.
That's a good question. Oh, what am I asking for in return? I guess this means I must have a nice life. If it takes me a minute to think about it.
I prepped you for this. I gave you this question last night, and you're still thinking on this. This is good.
I know. I think I probably would do some kind of. Oh man, it's so nerdy.
This is a history and movies podcast. You have found your people.
I'm not really like into cars and like, I don't know. I oftentimes I look at my stuff. I'm like, how do I have less stuff, not more of it? So, sure. I don't really know. I think here's what I would want. I would want a small library. And I can tell you a couple of them, but there'd be several several first edition books. Gene Toomer's Kane from the Harlem Renaissance. It would all be related to like that time.
Okay, go
and
for
another,
it. I'm in.
The first one I think about is there was an anthology called Fire that came out in the 1920s that Langston Hughes was a part of putting together. It's really rare. It's really expensive if you want to get it. It's like a magazine basically. So I'd want that. I'd want a first edition of the Weary Blues with the Miguel Covarrubias illustration on it. I mean, those are kind of like the extravagant things that I think about. I don't know. I mean, there's something rolling around in my head like about a vintage Land Rover, but like practically, like, do I really need that? Like,
Absolutely, you do. Absolutely, 1,000. Absolutely, you do.
Okay, so let's go there. Let's just go there then. Here's what it would be. It would be a roughly 1972 Land Rover that is like the most mechanical thing you've ever seen. And by mechanical, I mean you can just like open it up and just like spray out all the mud with the hose. There's no Bluetooth. There's no like $200 tire pressure sensor that's going to break and need to be replaced. Even though the tire pressure and the tires are actually fine, there's none of that. Like when it breaks, it just breaks. And then you get like a wrench and another tool and you fix it. I was trying to find something else, but honestly, like out of all the extravagant things that I think about getting, it is something like that. It is like a box of steel with 4 wheels that I can go anywhere in. It's not fast, but it's not going to get stuck in the snow or mud. And it's just like a big toy. That's what it would probably be. And my wife, if she watches this, is going to roll her eyes, as are my kids. But that's my role, right? Like that's what I do for them.
No, listen. Like, maybe they could ride along.
Yeah, they would like it if I actually had it. So yeah.
Listen, all I'm going for is like a Detroit style pizza with a Mexican Coke, and I'm happy. Like that's all I need. Maybe it's just because I'm starving right now. All right, I got one last question.
Yeah.
Is Sneakers a history movie?
I don't think so. I think it's, I don't know. I think more about, I think it's psychological. I think it uses history to explore psychological terrain. Because so much of what it's dealing with, and Dan Aykroyd's character is sort of like the gravitational core of this is fantasy and also the line between what we know and don't know, and the fear that what we know is actually not something we know, and how much uncertainty there is in historical knowledge. That's what I think. It's pulling at those threads. So there's always a reality. There's always the universe of established facts and available information. And we don't really know, but like some scholars like Peter Gallison, who was a historian of science at Harvard, I'm not sure if he's still there or not. He estimated that like 95% of all the information in the world is classified. So, there's this iceberg under the surface of things that we don't have access to. And so I think Sneakers is a film that sort of does this, right? It's dipping into this realm in a way that's completely speculative or that is otherwise seen as conspiracy theory. And it comes back into the realm of the quote unquote real world or actual facts. And then it tells a story that is what does Redford say at one point to Cosmo? I don't care. At some point he's like, I just want to live, right? Like,
thank you.
I don't want to be worried about getting thrown in jail or hit over the head. Like, I don't care about your big plans and dreams. Like, I just want to have a life, which is what happens in The Firm too. Not to bring it back to The Firm, but like in The Firm, he's like, I just want my life back. And that's what this whole thing is about.
Oh, I love it. I really want to take this movie and put it into a whole other pod where we talk about spy movies or the deep state or anything else. So please come back to do those.
I'd love to.
Right. Thank you so much. This has been amazing. I was so looking forward to this conversation. Like, I can't tell you, I was like, I've never talked to this guy. I just know that this is going to go cool. And this has been awesome. So thank you so very much. This has been awesome.
Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
And that's a wrap here at Historians of the Movies podcast. Thank you so very much to our guest, Brian Michael Murphy. Brian, please always come back to the pod. You are amazing, dude. This was our first conversation Brian and I had, and I just was like, this dude's awesome. So, Brian, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, of course, to Fletcher Powell. You can put Fletcher in somewhere in, if I'm Redford, which clearly I am, I don't know where Fletcher is. It's Sneakers. Is he Poitier? Is he River Phoenix? Is he Dan Aykroyd? Let's give him David Strathairn, because that's the coolest role in this film. We all know it. Unfortunately, Fletcher, that means we're going to have to take your eyes. So, Fletcher, thank you so much for being the producer on this pod and making this possible. And of course, even more so than our guest, Brian, and more so than Fletcher, and even more so than me, is you guys. Thank you so very much for continuing to be part of the HATM community and listening to this podcast. If this was your first time, hit like and subscribe on the podcast, whether you're listening to it on Apple or Spotify or anything else like that. And then share this damn thing with your friends. Tell other people about it. Help us grow this audience, this new different way that we are doing history and film. So I hope you enjoyed this pod. This was a lot of fun. We've got Raiders of the Lost Ark coming to you next week. So make sure you subscribe, and we'll see you soon. Ciao for now.